Welcome everyone to the technically second episode that we've recorded of the Indie Spotlight podcast. Going over today, the Amazon Prime movie One Night in Miami. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ethan Fantz.
I'm Kimmy Schofield.
Fantastic. And we are here to discuss what we both believe to be a quite good movie. I guess we haven't really talked about the opinions of it.
We haven't, but I think we agree.
We agree. Both agree that this is worth everyone's time. General plot of this movie. It is a fictionalized retelling of a real night that took place in 1964 in Miami, where Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali, had a fight, and Sam Cooke, Malcolm X, and Jim Brown were all in attendance, and then they all spent the evening together. As far as I know, no one knows what actually took place that night, but this was a play written in 2013 that was trying to understand and attribute some sort of story and dialogue to those events. And was then adapted in 2019 and then directed by Regina King, written by Kemp Powers as well. I guess we can kind of just talk about some of the characters of this real quick, some of the actors as well. Leslie Odom Jr. plays Sam Cooke. Kingsley Ben-Adir plays Malcolm X. Eli Goree plays Muhammad Ali, and Aldis Hodge plays Jim Brown. For me, at the start of this show is Kingsley Ben-Adir as Malcolm X. I thought that he was really, 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 really good.
I also thought he was really, really, really good. And he was, of the other actors, the one who I probably recognized the least.
Yes. Yeah, no. The only things I've ever seen him in were Love Life on HBO Max and High Fidelity on Hulu. Leslie Odom Jr. is probably the most famous of the four, given his reputation from Hamilton. We also both love his Christmas music.
Yes, we do.
Eli Goree and Aldis Hodge haven't seen in as many things. Aldis Hodge, I first saw in Friday Night Lights playing Ray Voodoo Tatum, one of the quarterbacks who gets Coach Taylor in trouble for the shady recruiting practices. But yeah, and then Lance Reddick also in this movie, just kind of a little bit of stunt casting for that. Does a pretty good job at playing Malcolm X's bodyguard as well in this. Some of the overarching themes of this movie have to do a lot with racism, obviously, in 1964 and the height of the civil rights movement, as well as the Nation of Islam playing a part in both Malcolm X's and Cassius Clay's life. This movie is kind of the launching point for Cassius Clay becoming Muhammad Ali as well. Kind of details some of the events that lead to his eventual rise into the Nation of Islam and his change to Muhammad Ali. And with that, we can kind of turn into talking about, I guess, your initial impressions of the movie, your thoughts, what you liked, didn't like, hated, loved, all of the above.
A wide span of everything.
Yes.
I didn't realize that it was adapted from a play when I first saw it, and I immediately, upon watching it, thought this would make a really good play. And
yeah,
and I
makes
learned
sense.
that it was. But I love, as far as the way that it is filmed, I love that it's intimate in all of the scenes. It's pretty simple in all of the sets, and so you get to just kind of hear everything that each character is talking about and kind of what they stand for and represent without any distractions, which I think is important for, I guess, the themes that go into the whole movie overall.
Yeah. What's interesting too, we're kind of in this Oscar season right now. Another movie that's been talked about a lot is The Trial of the Chicago 7, dealing with some similar themes, but also I thought very much felt like a play on screen. You always are following the characters, like the main 7 characters. There's no deviations, there's no scenes without these characters. And that's kind of the same thing with One Night in Miami, where one of the 4 of the main characters is always in the scene. So it's always following those 4 people.
Yep. I thought the time frame of it, because it takes place on February 25th, I think was the fight of 64.
Sure.
It sounds right. And
let's assume it's right, and if it's not, I'll correct you after I
I'm
look it up
pretty sure
here.
it's right. But also
February
definitely double
25th.
check
Yes.
because I am
Yes.
saying I'm not. That's right, right?
Yeah, it is.
And then Malcolm X is killed on February 21st the following year.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, not that there was an intentional parallel for them to be meeting in the real world on this date and then have him be murdered a year later, just 5 days earlier from the anniversary of that night. But
yeah, and there was a little bit of foreshadowing of that in this movie as well. I guess more depicted in his paranoia. I don't know if you can call it paranoia when it's real, because like he was actually being followed and was eventually murdered.
Right.
But his paranoia does show throughout this movie a few times.
Definitely does.
Whether or not the people he spots in the parking lot are actually following him and all of the other stories he details. There is the moment in the movie where his house gets a brick thrown into it and it's on fire. So yeah, definitely some real stuff going on with that.
Well, and his paranoia, and this goes into, again, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm sure you're some kind of familiar with who these people are. And if you're not,
yes,
you should look them up. And
yeah,
not really.
It doesn't really go into the background of much of these people. It expects that you know who they are, especially Jim Brown, I would say, more than any of the others, because his story is not really detailed as much as the other three.
Right, which I was surprised by. And Malcolm X, as far as his paranoia, quickly going back to it, I think it definitely reflects his status as somebody who is trying to speak out for the Black community, and really hones into his point, especially when he's kind of targeting Sam Cooke for not using his ability as a famous Black man, using that platform as a way to help make the Black community progress and be seen as more than just nothing, essentially. And Malcolm X, out of all of those people, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, is famous because he's a famous boxer, and Jim Brown, famous NFL player, and Sam Cooke, famous singer. And then Malcolm X has every right to be paranoid, aside from just his platform about what he believed as far as everything. Yes. But I don't think that the other people were naive to racism or anything, which Sam Cooke talks about at one point in there, that he knows what's going on out there. But Malcolm X definitely had every right to be paranoid. And I think it played well. I mean, I don't think that it detracted from any of the points he was trying to make or their relationship with each other or anything. And
yes. And I was just looking, the timelines that I in my head for when Malcolm X or Martin Luther King were assassinated are not always clear, but Martin Luther King assassinated in 1968. Yes. Just a few years after this as well.
Yes. And it reminded me of, I did a play called The Mountaintop, which is, it's magical realism. It's fictional, but it's about his last night before he gives his dream speech. And when they were out on the balcony, it just kind of reminded me of that. It's completely separate. But
totally.
Jim Brown, I thought they were going to focus on his story more, just because of the way that he was introduced in the story.
Yes. Well, his introduction in the movie was setting the tone a little bit for, oh yes, racism is a real thing, and we're going to be talking about this a lot.
It doesn't matter who we are right now. It's 1964, and we're Black men in America.
Yes, especially in the Deep South and stuff like that. It's going to be very prevalent. I guess also to just kind of set the context, we probably are going to be discussing racism a lot throughout this episode, and just for people who haven't, because this will be the first episode that airs, I am a white man going to be talking about racism in America.
And I am a white and Black woman who will also be discussing.
Just to kind of set the bar there, as we get into this. I would say the main crux of the movie is that conversation between Malcolm and Sam Cooke. I would say that that's like the main conflict in the room. And with Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali kind of being the ancillary characters, either supporting or trying to defend the points of view of both Sam and Malcolm as their discussions take place. There is a distinct line where Sam even says, out of the four of us here, one of us doesn't belong. and
Yeah.
pointing to Malcolm X as not being the celebrity, super rich, powerful guy out of the group. Obviously a celebrity in his own right to an extent, but in more being maligned by the white community, as where the other three are more being celebrated.
Yes.
So I guess from that we can kind of talk about, actually there was one interesting thing I saw, and I don't think it was intentional. When they all arrive at the hotel, sorry, when everyone but Sam Cooke arrives at the hotel and they're in that car that has the four doors that open kind of together, that shot is like the same shot from the opening of Entourage. And I didn't know if that was intentional or not, but it's the exact same shot.
I need to ask Regina.
Like, I didn't know if they're like, this is Muhammad Ali's Entourage, and this is, you know, Jim Brown and Malcolm X as Muhammad Ali's Entourage.
It's a cool image.
Yeah. From an Oscar perspective as well, this has been nominated for 3 Oscars, one for Best Adapted Screenplay, one for Leslie Odom as a supporting actor, and one for Leslie Odom for writing the song that is in the credits called Speak Now.
Yes.
So if you watch this movie, watch the credits, there's a good song at the end as well, written by Leslie Odom Jr. I guess, do you have any, like, when you were watching this, do you think there was a specific reason as to why perhaps Jim Brown's story wasn't explored as much? Because even entering this, he's probably the one I know the least about, or the stuff I do know about him is just the football stuff, right?
Yes.
It's not anything that he had to do with the civil rights movement or anything like that. Like, his name doesn't come up as much in the history that I know, I guess, with that.
I agree completely. I didn't know much more about him other than that he was an NFL player, and knew nothing about his actions in the civil rights movement or anything. And I don't know if it was done to have a scale of each person as far as how vocal they were about their stance as a Black man in the community, and as far as representing different aspects of racism or progressivism, what they were experiencing. But he seemed to be kind of the mediator in between all of the arguments that happened with everyone. And even in the beginning, when he talks to the man who is a family friend, and then the man doesn't even let him in the house and calls him the N-word, it's that just continues. So as you said, it just kind of set the tone for the whole thing, which would then make sense as his role as the mediator. But I knew nothing about him being an actor, and I said, oh wow, when they show the shot at the end, when he says that he's gonna quit football and he's gonna go pursue being an actor, I literally said, oh wow, because I had no idea.
Yeah,
I'll have to look him up more.
Yeah, no, I agree. He was kind of the voice of reason when he needed to be, I guess. When he got certain people alone, he was able to, he was the one that explicitly said, after the first argument between Malcolm X and Sam Cooke regarding Sam's business prowess and how he may or may not be advancing the Black community, Jim is the one that says real power is economic power. And that Sam is the only one of the 4 that have that. Yeah, I also wrote down as I was watching this, just as much as things change, they all stay the same. Like, that this movie comes out in 2020 and it's just all still as relevant as it was in 1964.
Yep.
And it reminds me of movies that come out like Remember the Titans, or different movies like that. That movies that I really loved growing up. But at the end of the movie, it's almost as if like, we solved racism. We did it. And we can all move on.
Okay, it's done. We did it.
We did it. And then I think that's when that movie came out, I don't know, 2000-ish. You watch that and you just like, it makes it so that racism just isn't in the forefront of people's minds, because it's like, oh, it's 2000. There's no way it's still the same. And here we are. And it is. It's still the same.
It still exists. I said that when I watched it. I said, okay, well, then there were the 70s, and 70s had a lot of hippies and things. It was kind of that start of that. But all the peace, love, and understanding and everything that went with that, this racism still here. Didn't wash away anything.
No. Jim Brown had another line in that same conversation where he says, something about essentially white people in that time feel like they should be congratulated for not hating Black people, not for treating them the same, but for just not kicking them when they're down, sort of
Yeah.
thing. And then he also goes on to say, like, he hates them more than the overt racists in Alabama, Georgia, all those places that he's from. And I think that that is still, it's changed in the way it presents itself today, but still very much kind of the same. And it's not so much active racism as much as it is ignorance or apathy, I would say, today than it was
Apathy is a
then.
good word.
Yeah, so I think that that's kind of was probably the reason as to why this is coming out now. Obviously, with a year ago, the George Floyd stuff happening and all of the Black Lives Matter protests happening over the last year. And as we
Just
record this
when
right now,
Leslie Odom wrote his song.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I think that's when Leslie Odom Jr. wrote that song.
Oh yeah, sure.
That was specifically involved in that time.
Yeah, for sure. And as we were talking at this very moment, the trial of George Floyd is happening. So this is all still super relevant, and it's not going away.
Sure isn't.
And no, it's here. It's going to be here for a while.
A discussion that should be had.
Yes.
And Jim Brown made a comment also about how he likes white women, so he wouldn't.
The metaphor with the ice cream.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it just kind of reminded me of this. I understand that there's definitely a challenge about where there's a line drawn and when you speak up, and it just reminded me, and this is now super just personal, but my mother is white and my father is Black, and she said that in the 80s when they were dating, she got yelled at and screamed at for taking him away from the Black community by dating him. And for her, they fell in love with each other, they wanted to be together, and not for him, but for members of the community, they were like, we have to stick together. What are you doing going with this other person? And I had never even thought of that because I grew up in a predominantly white area, and it surprised me. But then it makes sense to an extent.
For sure. I guess that could be an interesting conversation to have, is like, what was your first experience of either observing or racism or having it directed towards you? I can start, or do you want to, or you can start with that as well?
I just thought of two things.
Okay.
So I'll go.
Great.
I only remember, the first thing that I remember that I didn't even recognize, and perhaps I was exposed earlier and I just, again, had no idea, was in 4th grade, there was somebody else who's another student, another 4th grader, whose brother told him some joke that was, what do Black people, Mexicans, and another racial group have in common? I don't remember what the joke was. I don't remember anything about it. What I do remember is my mother finding out about it somehow, calling the teacher, making the child and his mother come and have a meeting with us and apologize for it. And he was in 4th grade. He had no idea what he was apologizing for because none of us understood whatever the joke was. He just heard it from something else. But I remember being like, I'm 9 and I'm not sure why everybody's really upset. I don't understand anything either. And then as an adult, I was dating a white man, and there was another white man who came in and knew the person I was dating. And this was while I was bartending one day. And I said, oh yeah, I'm dating Jeff. And he said, oh, you must get weird looks. I dated a Black girl once too. And this was 2011. And I had no response. I was like, what? What? And so I definitely grew up like naive because I was around predominant. My school was 93% Caucasian, and everyone was very nice to me and kind to me, and I didn't recognize a lot of it. But I'm also lighter skinned, which we'll talk about after you share your first, because it's gonna go back into Malcolm.
Yeah, probably. I think my first exposure to racism was actually me being an idiot when I was a kid. So growing up in Chatham, Illinois. I was the
Kid.
kid from your story. No, grew up in Chatham, Illinois, outside of Springfield. Chatham, I mean, you would have to really search hard to find a Black person living in Chatham. There was one living in my neighborhood. A family, a Black father, white mother, with a couple of children. One of them was my age. New to the neighborhood, I just kind of rode my bike over there and just started talking to the kid who lived there. The dad was very, from my point of view, when I was 10, was like
Yes.
very standoffish to me. And then I eventually asked the kid I was hanging out, was like, does he just like not like white people or something like that? And then not knowing that his wife was white either at the time.
Yeah.
And then no, the kid told me, he's like, no, like my mom's white. I think we're fine. I think the dad may have been like a little apprehensive just being the only Black family in a neighborhood of entirely
Sure.
white families too.
Yeah. What's this weird kid doing riding over?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So that was the pretty much the only Black person I knew until college. There were a couple of the Black kids at my school. And then Springfield has Black communities that are relatively ridden with poverty and crime as well.
Isolated and
yes. But I was never in those communities. I never really saw anything. And then I was like a sophomore at U of I, and I took African American Studies 101. And then yeah, that was probably one of my favorite classes at U of I. One of the ones I actually tried at.
Good. It was good.
It was good. And the best part was like, I mean, we had the lectures 2 days a week, but then one day a week we would have the smaller group settings.
And serious arguments in those settings.
Right. I rarely said anything.
Good for you.
In those settings.
Probably right.
I was just listening because I was learning a lot. And I think every white person's first exposure to hearing about the stories of Black people experiencing racism is, well, number one, I would never do that. And then two, their experience paints white people as, bad a lot of the time. And that's to the extreme is Malcolm X's perspective in this. Yes. And I think every white person struggle a lot with this is maybe I have contributed to this and I just haven't been aware of it. And how do I reckon with that a lot of the time? And what was interesting to me was that there were like two very outspoken white males, not defensive of their own position as white men, but just were challenging more the stories and opinions of the Black members of the classroom as well. And the TA or the mediator was very willing to encourage those discussions, which I really enjoyed as well. There was no like fighting going on with the discussions, but
I had a very different experience in that class, which I still really enjoyed. But I
go ahead and let's hear.
Took it, and our TA was Black, and he grew up in a rural area of Ohio, and he would do exercises that would try to, I now know, show systemic racism. And it would be everybody in the class stand in a line. Now, if you are a single parent or have a single parent, grew up with one parent, whatever, step forward. And if you have a scholarship, step forward. And the point was to show that most of the students who ended up at the front of the line were not just Caucasian students. They were a minority of some sort, specifically Black. But I remember him also sharing a lot of experiences and then asking if other people experienced the same thing. And if I didn't raise my hand, he would single me out. And we got in arguments about it because I would say to him, my experience is not your experience. And I understand that you've experienced this racism very directly. I have not, and I'm not lying about it. And now I know that he wasn't trying to agree with everything I say. I know that he was trying to point out like, hey, there's an issue that you have not been exposed to, and I'm exposing you to it now. And I wish I had known that then, because we got along fine, but there were really heated discussions, mostly just between myself and the TA at the time. Oh, really? Okay. And I remember a couple months after, I have a family member who is married to somebody who I'm not here for him, can't stand him. I have become extremely outspoken about it at family gatherings, which makes them uncomfortable, and I just don't care anymore. But in that class, we learned about the word picnic coming from when white people would gather around to watch Black people be hung.
Hmm.
And I said, this is what this word is derived from, because it was some sort of 4th of July gathering or something. And this man who is white told me I was wrong, told me I made that up. And I was like, I learned this in a class in college, and we're just having a discussion about it. He sent me links to websites about how it
The
was
history of
wrong.
picnic.
And I was like, okay, yeah, like this is this. You are literally a member of my family now, and you are trying to tell me basically that this racist word didn't stem from a racist act at
Hmm.
all, and you won't listen. And it was frustrating. And that was probably my first like thing that I organized with the family. And again, he's a distant in-law person who came in when I was an adult, but I was happy that I was comfortable enough to say, okay, and I don't need to talk to you. I don't need to deal with you. And
Hmm.
in your other students who were in your class who wanted to learn more and play devil's advocate or look to get further educated about everything, reminds me of someone who we know, you and I know,
Hmm.
who asked a question, especially when like Black Girl Magic and everything started coming up really big, and asked something about how he could be a better ally. And there is another mixed person in my area who told him, I don't have to tell you this. You need to look it up. Stop asking me to explain things to you. And I, at that point, was like, I don't know how to feel, because he is genuinely trying to find out how he can be better. But I do understand that it's not your responsibility
Hmm.
to do it, which is why I'm glad that there are classes like African American Studies we can take.
Yes. I actually think U of I was doing an extension course through one of the major online learning brands, like a free African American Studies course that they were offering through that,
Good.
which was really interesting. I do have another question about your class
Yeah.
with like you and your TA. You were saying
Mhm.
that he was trying to expose you to things you hadn't been exposed to yet.
Mhm.
Do you think he was also perhaps trying to show you that perhaps you had been exposed but had not realized it?
Yes, I definitely think that now.
Hmm.
And again, at that point, I just knew that I had friends in college, and I grew up with mostly white people, and that I didn't feel like I had a racist bone in my body.
Hmm.
He would bring up that Black people can't be racist, and people would get really upset about that. White people in the
Yeah.
class would get upset about that, which again is just getting defensive about not understanding how racism exists in the world and how oppression works. And now, even looking back on things that he told me and things that I experienced, he was absolutely right. I didn't experience the same things he did, but I was exposed to similar circumstances, and I just either played them off or shut them down or blacked them out. I mean, even in elementary school, I wasn't allowed to listen to anything except for like oldies music.
Sure.
And I had friends who loved the Spice Girls. And no matter what, I was Scary Spice, no matter what, period. I mean, and I wouldn't argue it because I didn't even know who the Spice Girls were. I didn't
Yeah.
care. But I remember them like specifically trying to do my hair a certain way. And I was like, I don't know what we're doing. Like, we're singing songs. Like, cool, sounds good to me. That's great. And now I'm like, and there's an episode of 10/15 where they have the non-white character. Well,
Mhm.
she's supposed to be mixed also.
Mhm.
Be Scary Spice. And I was like, oh, dang.
Yeah.
I also experienced this, because she was the one person, and none of the other girls who were white wanted to ever be her or dress like her. So I would do it because to me it was just, okay, yeah, there are 5 and I'm the 5th person here.
Makes
Sounds good.
sense. That's just math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is now I know it wasn't.
No.
Now I know it wasn't. And I'm sure as 7-year-olds, they probably didn't register it to that point either.
Right.
But
They were just going what they saw.
mhm.
Yeah. Unfortunate. Yeah, I think the distinction between just like prejudice and racism is important for people to understand too. Like I think racism implies a majority versus a minority often, whereas the prejudice, you can be against anything pretty
Mhm.
much, which is why being racist against white people is really hard to attain in America.
Yes. Yes, it
Yes.
is. Yeah. And when Malcolm, I don't remember which character in One Night in Miami points out that he is lighter skinned than the
Jim
rest
Brown
of
points
them.
that out to Malcolm X, and he
Jim Brown.
says that it's always interesting to him that the lighter skinned folks always end up being the most inflammatory about it.
Yes. Yep, he does say inflammatory. And I have taken note of that to other people who I am friends with who are lighter skinned. And it used to bother me because I was concerned that they were overstepping.
Mhm.
But now I think that it's great if you are able to use your platform to help benefit somebody else. But
Mhm.
there is the Robin DiAngelo who wrote White Fragility.
Mhm.
In her book, she talks about multiracial people or people who might seem ambiguous, that they have this just pressure to explain who they are and choose a side. I think it's the phrase that she uses. And it can either be complicated or it can benefit them, which is also what they talk about in One Night in Miami. But it's true. You probably had an easier time as a child, Malcolm X, than any of the other men who are in that room with you. But also, I'm sure that there were some people who were Black and were of a darker complexion who were upset with you that just because your grandfather, great grandfather, I think it was his great grandfather, maybe, uh, assaulted. I don't know what words we can say on here, but
We can stick with that for now. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, we could say sexually assaulted. We could say that. Yeah, that's
his
fine.
his mother, I believe,
Mhm.
that he turned out to be a lighter complexion, and he resented him for it, rightfully so, resented
Mhm.
that action that he just happened to become like that. But I do wonder, would people have listened to him more than if one of the other three members talked about it, just based on his complexion?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Um, what's interesting too about that is I think Malcolm X, out of all of the civil rights leaders that at least I am aware of, was the most derided by the white community, even with his lighter complexion.
Yes.
It also reminds me of something I learned with just in the past couple of years. I don't know if you're familiar with the rapper Logic.
Yep.
He is half Black, but
Mhm.
he looks very white.
Yes.
But he raps a lot about his experience as being a half Black, uses the N-word a lot in his music as well, and is often maligned by other rappers who have a darker complexion, that this guy didn't experience
Yeah.
what we experienced because people assumed that he was white. And I don't have an answer to this. I don't know what the right answer is as far
I
like
don't
how
either.
to portray your experiences when that's happening. But I think it's, while not immediately the same as overt racism to someone of a darker skin color, it's almost a more of an internal challenge for the people that are of the mixed race, of
Mhm.
the lighter complexion. It's, yeah, a different challenge, I would say, for
Yeah.
them.
Because do you feel, I mean, I know when I'm around friends who grew up in more urban areas who also are Black, if I'm around them for days, I notice that my manner of speaking changes a little bit, and that, which does not bother me at all, but then I have to think a week later, like, oh no, did I offend everybody? Because my typical manner of speech is different, but because I was around them, which completely separate. But if I'm hanging out in the South and there are people with Southern accents, I start saying words with a slight accent also. And but that doesn't have anything to do with racism. When you're with a group of people who are systemically oppressed and then you take on any of their characteristics as a mixed person, am I even allowed to do that? Is this a problem for everybody? If I get cast as somebody in a
Yeah.
certain role, am I dark enough or light enough? And fortunately for me, it hasn't come up as too strong of an issue personally with the things that I'm doing in my life.
Mhm.
But I mean, in school, when were the options to check what you are, which everybody always asks, what are you? Do you
That's a fun question.
do you check it to get the benefit, or do you not check it? Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
have an answer either.
nor do I. Um, I do think this movie, coming off the heels of the recent Black Lives Matter resurgence, I guess, like it's been going, the Black Lives Matter has been
Mhm.
going on for a while, but obviously had a huge resurgence after all George Floyd and then the subsequent murders as well, um, has prompted a lot of hopefully productive discussions. I know within my family, we've certainly had some heated moments, but I think in the end, kind of made some ground from our
Good.
perspective. My family is all white. Typically all grew up in white areas, haven't experienced a lot of overt racism in our own lives, but I think this has kind of opened our eyes to a lot of stuff. I think we've taken the time to educate ourselves and have hopefully productive
Very good.
discussions. I do think that a couple of the figures that I didn't really know about that I wish I would have learned more about in school, one being Malcolm X. I think that really the only thing I learned about Malcolm X in high school was that he was the bad version of Martin Luther King.
Yes, that's
That
what
was
I
it.
learned also.
Yeah.
He was the bad version and he wanted all white people to die is what I learned. And
Yes.
that's not it's not what it was.
It's not a very nuanced perspective.
No, no, it's not. Nope.
I wish I would have learned more about him. And as I've read more, I think, yes, there was a stark difference between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X when they started as to their approaches as to how to get the attention of the world. But from what I read, at least towards the end of their lives, they were really kind of in the same place, that it needed to be more of a gray of their black and white approach, which again, didn't learn ever.
No, didn't learn. And they were still both assassinated.
Both assassinated.
People were not able to get past the one extreme they could focus on for them.
Mm-hmm. The other figure that I didn't really know anything about, other than that he existed, was James Baldwin, the author.
Mm-hmm.
There was a movie on Netflix called I Am Not Your Negro, which kind of depicts his life and times a bit within the civil rights movement. If you haven't seen it, definitely recommend checking it out.
I haven't. I want to.
Really good. My first really deep dive exposure into his life and to his work was very prominently a part of the civil rights movement. Not once was he brought up in my education.
No.
He is also one of my sister's favorite authors, my sister being a very prolific English professor, but has reminded me over and over again to read more of his stuff. And he was so fed up with the lack of respect he was getting in America that he went to France for the majority of his life. Maybe not the majority, but for a time in his life, and wrote there, and then finally felt the calling to come back to America and join the likes of Malcolm X, the likes of Martin Luther King, and help the movement a little bit. This movie reminds me just how much I don't know about some of these people.
I agree completely. And I would love to learn more, because as they kind of say, when at one point Sam Cooke says, "Who cares?" when they're talking about him not using his platform as a means to progress. When I think of Sam Cooke, I just think of him as a singer.
The musician. I
don't think of him as doing anything else, and which is a big point in the movie also. But there's, as we said, a stark contrast with Malcolm X. But at no point during this film, when I went into it, I wondered how much conflict there was going to be because of Malcolm X with this group of people. I didn't know, because all I knew is that they were together one night in Miami. I didn't know that they were friends in real life. I didn't know that they actually spent time together, all four of them. And so I wondered, okay, is this fictional and Malcolm X is going to start fighting everybody, or what is going to happen? And then it just is a heated discussion amongst friends, essentially, about where they are in life and what they can do as individuals.
Yes. And Malcolm, I think
X doesn't seem like the bad guy in it.
No. And it's all, again, comes from people's ability to portray empathy and assume other people's perspectives.
Yes.
And try to understand. I think it's interesting too with artists like Sam Cooke and even like Marvin Gaye, who have songs like Change is Gonna Come and Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, which is about specifically racism and their experience with it. And when is this going to change? And I don't know if everyone really understands. Like they hear that song, like, oh, I love this song.
I don't think so. Especially Marvin Gaye's. I don't think they do.
Yes.
Oh yeah, like this one. Like with the cover of like this song. Like
Mhm.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think people do either. There's even one now, Put Your Records On. There's a white artist who covers it, a white male, and
Right.
Corinne Bailey Rae's song.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's being played on the radio. And I understand people appreciating art and loving art and everything, but the song is about Black girls appreciating and loving their own hair,
Mhm.
which is constantly critiqued in workplaces and media everywhere. So there are a lot of people who are not thrilled about it, which I absolutely understand.
Sure. Along those same lines, that song was covered by a cappella group at U of I with all white members while I
Yes,
was there as well.
indeed. And
Mhm.
people don't recognize it.
No, no, they
Think
don't. Yeah, not the best.
about
Um,
it. The best. It is. There's because Jimmy Fallon who just had somebody on his show, a TikTok person. I
Addison Rae.
don't TikTok, so I don't know for sure,
Mhm.
but somebody who was teaching him how to do dances.
Yes.
And a lot of the dances originated by Black people.
Mhm.
And people said, you got this white female who is already famous and has the things that she has and is not oppressed, when you could have credited the people who actually created it, but it was
Yes.
disregarded. And I think that those kind of conversations are where I know a lot of people who get upset and are saying things like, well, it's just a dance, but no, it can be used for a really good
Can move
thing.
the needle 0.5%.
Yeah.
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 With the Sam Cooke stuff too, stuff that I didn't know, that he had his own label, he owned all his masters, all
I
that
didn't
sort of
know that
stuff.
either.
That he was financing the Rolling Stones essentially. Didn't know any of that.
I didn't know that either. Just the singer who sang
Yeah.
songs.
I do think to having this sort of discussion, it's worth pointing out not everyone needs to be an activist, but everyone should be aware of what the hell is going on. And I think that's one of the lessons this movie is kind of trying to portray, that yes, Sam Cooke, while maybe not as vocal as Malcolm X, can do things in his own way to help the cause. Same with Jim Brown,
Yeah.
same with Muhammad Ali.
Yep. It's the only way to help move things forward without disregarding the past.
Correct. Or as it has been in mine, whitewashed.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yes.
So gotta change that. And I don't know what they're teaching in history anymore. I imagine it's a lot of the same stuff.
I do too. I imagine that too. And I don't know how it's gonna shift.
No, I mean, the only thing I can think of is the internet, but that's a double-edged sword.
Right?
So
yeah. I know. I feel like in this town, in Champaign, being in the art community, there are a lot of people who are progressive and who are activists. And so I always think, wow, this is an amazing place and people are really working to be allies. And then 5 seconds later, there's people who just completely tear that away and shut it down. And because those people are in a position of power or literally have guns or whatever, then where can those other people who are speaking up go?
Yeah. No, in LA too, I think limited exposure to be sure, but I do think that there is an element of being liberal is trendy, and maybe people don't actually know what they mean, or aren't really acting in a positive way in that regard. And I think that that's something, even if you consider yourself a liberal, being educated is also important.
Yes. Always learning.
Being educated on both sides. I don't care if you're conservative or liberal, be educated.
Be educated.
Yeah. And if that requires you to self-educate, then
Good.
By all means. Yes. Well, I don't know how much else I have to say about this at the moment. Did
We're
you?
talking about the Oscars.
We could talk about the Oscars. You know what? I actually, yes. One point I had about the Oscars. I'm
Yeah,
pretty mad that Kingsley Ben-Adir didn't get a nom.
I was gonna say, I know this. I agree completely. I
Yes,
thought that he was amazing, and Regina King it was her first.
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, flashed for a second. It was, what was it? It was, I don't remember what film festival it was, where she was the first African American female
Mm-hmm.
to have a
Was
film
it
debut.
not like Sundance or something like that?
It was something like that, but I don't think it was Sundance.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll quickly run down who the best actor noms were for this year. Anthony Hopkins.
The Venice Film Festival. That's
Venice Film Festival. Got it. Okay. Anthony Hopkins for The Father. Haven't seen The Father. Actually, don't really know much about it, but
I don't recognize it.
adding it to the list. Riz Ahmed, who is in Sound of Metal, another movie on Amazon that I've been meaning to watch but haven't. I've heard it's really good, so I believe that certainly is warranted. Stephen Yeun from Minari. Stephen Yeun I recognize from The Walking Dead. I've seen him in a couple other movies as well. Minari is, I think, going to be the next episode we do, but it's supposed to be really, really, really good. Chadwick Boseman from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. If you haven't seen that, it's on Netflix. Also very good. If I had to guess, that he's probably going to win this category. And then Gary Oldman in Mank. Mank, another movie on Netflix as well, detailing the story of the man who wrote Citizen Kane, and I'm blanking on his name. A movie that I couldn't quite make it through because I don't know enough about Citizen Kane to understand what was happening.
I don't either.
Yeah, and a Citizen Kane one that I remember watching when I was like 15 and had no idea what was going on. But everyone's like, this is the greatest movie ever. I was like, oh, great. Okay. I'm watching the greatest movie ever.
Agreed.
Got it.
I've been told that also, and I just never did. I never watched it.
I did rewatch Casablanca recently. Still very good. Still very good.
I'll watch it.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I don't know if this. I wish they would expand the number of nominees more than 5. Like if they're gonna have like 35 Best Picture nominees.
Yes.
There aren't 35. They're like 8 or 9.
Well, it feels like more compared to the
other categories. Yes. Another movie that kind of deals with a lot of these topics. Judas and the Black Messiah on HBO Max did get nominated for Best Picture. But neither of the actors, who are both leads, I would say, this movie, got nominated for Best Actor. They both got nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Both of the leads. And I don't know how that works.
Don't know.
I'm not on the nominating committee, but it seems weird.
If we were.
But we were kind of talking about the assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. This movie is also about an assassination of the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. It does show a bit more explicit nature of those events. So if you are squeamish in that regard, get over it. Go watch it anyway.
Yeah.
That would be my advice.
I respect that advice.
Yes. So yeah, I think for us, we're going to keep on this Oscar path a little bit. For those who don't know, which is probably anyone listening to this prior to the next episode dropping, we also did an episode on In and of Itself on Hulu. Details a magician's path through his life and the different experiences he had, while also making people cry and having superhuman almost feats happen on stage.
He's amazing.
Daryl Clogadio, I highly recommend you go watch that as well. It'll be a bit of a palate cleanser if you're just going straight for One Night in Miami, Judas and the Black Messiah, Trial of the Chicago 7. This will be a bit of a different vein from those other ones. Yes. The one thing we didn't do, the segment that we do every week, even though we've only had 2 weeks, is the coffee cup test, talking about any breaks of immersion from the film. We can just touch on this quickly. I rewatched it right before we taped this. There was not really anything that I noticed. Like everything, all the time period pieces, like all the cars, all the buildings, everything was like very much 100% cool with that.
Yeah.
There was no really anything they were drinking had liquid in it, which was
It did.
cool. Yeah, there was nothing for me on
Yeah,
that.
I don't think that I got taken out of it at any point either. And I felt like it flowed the entire time, even when they cut to another scene, which didn't happen too often.
Hmm.
There's one part where Sam Cooke is at the store or something, and that was just, I mean, that, not that that was bad or taking anything away. There just weren't a whole lot of things that distracted me at all.
Actually, now that you kind of bring that up, that's that scene where him and Cassius Clay go to the liquor store because he storms out
Mhm.
because
And he
Malcolm
gets
X
money
makes
for
the
the
point. Yeah, he
picture.
makes the point that Bob Dylan wrote a song that was more relevant to Black people's struggles than Sam Cooke ever has.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Cooke kind of storms out.
Yes.
And it was interesting to me that when he comes back, he's like, fine. He's just like, let's go
Yeah.
party. I thought that was a little weird. But that was maybe the only thing, that he
Yeah.
didn't have any sort of residual anger or contempt walking back into that room.
And let it go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of goes along though with his who cares when he talks about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's
stuff.
just his
But I
personality.
also overall, and I don't think this was a distraction thing for me, but I didn't want anybody to fight physically or be screaming at each other or berating each other, anything like that. But I did wonder throughout the film if it was going to come to that point. And that's simply because of the topics of racism and religion being so prominent in the film, and them being disappointed that they're not going to party and
Mhm.
they can't drink, but they do drink. I'm glad it didn't happen because I think that probably would have taken away from
That would have
them
cheapened it, I think, a
respecting
bit.
each other. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have, yeah, cheapened
But
it. Yeah.
I think, yeah, using the power of dialogue and the power of the personalities and brains of those four people is what electrifies the movie.
Yes.
Um,
I wonder if Regina King will ever direct a play now, because I think she did an amazing job with this film.
mhm.
And
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like thinking what role, like, because I would have liked to see her on screen as well, but I don't know what role she would have played in this
Right?
either. So
I did wonder when I saw their wives they're barely in the movie, and
yes.
which the point of the movie is about these four men
Mhm.
and their stance in the community. But I also wonder, like, oh, it's Regina King. I mean, she doesn't have to be in the movie at all. She can cast whoever she wants, direct whoever she wants to, do whatever she wants to do.
Yeah.
But I just love her as an actor also, and I'm excited to see her continuing to build upon her talents.
Yes. That being said, if you do want to see Regina King in a movie that has a lot to do with a lot of the topics we're talking about, you can go watch If Beale Street Could Talk, which came out around 2 years ago. I believe you can find it on Hulu. That's where I have watched it most recently. Not only is it a great but also harrowing story of a Black man's struggle in New York City, of being wrongly accused for a crime he did not commit, and the ripple effect of that situation. The soundtrack is also one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard in my life. So,
Excellent.
2 reasons to go watch that.
Those are 2 good reasons.
Mhm. I think with that, we can probably close this out.
All right.
So we thank you again for listening with us or talking with us or doing whatever you're doing while listening to this
Whatever.
podcast.
On our first official
First launched episode on our own channel. Yes. Be sure to check out any of the other Front Row movie review channels for any of their Oscar content as well. We will probably be on this train until the Oscars happen.
That's something to look forward to.
Yes. Tune in hopefully next week. We'll be discussing Minari, the cool. All right. Well, I'm Ethan Vance.
I'm Kimmy Schofield.
And we will see you next week.
Later.
Bye.